Hello everyone! Today we're going to be learning all about the nervous system. So the nervous system is broken down into two sections. So we have the central nervous system, which you can abbreviate as CNS. That's made up of the brain and spinal cord. And these control and coordinate the body's activities. Right? These are the main components of the nervous system, right? The brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, also called the PNS. So this is made of all the peripheral nerves. So you can see here labeled in yellow on this diagram, all the nerves that branch off of that main spinal cord, right? Because we've got the brain here, the spinal cord, and all of these nerves branch off of that spinal cord, which is why the spinal cord is so important. Everything branches off of it. So these carry messages from the central nervous system to other parts of the body. Similar to how telephone wires connect all of your house all of the houses in the community, right? All the wires kind of connect. Okay, so there's three main functions of the nervous system. We've got a sensory function in which we are collecting information from the environment, right? Think about our senses, right? Smell, touch, taste, hearing. We are collecting the information in our environment. Integration is the processing center. So that's like the brain, right? So that's how we're making decisions. We're evaluating, comparing things to memories or things we've seen in the past. And then discarding unnecessary information or committing things to memory that we found significant. And then the motor response is when the brain tells the muscles to do some sort of function, to pick up a glass of water, to run, to speak, right? Those are the three main functions. So let's look at an example. So if we hear our phone ringing and you decide to answer it, your hand picks up the phone, see if you can identify the following: the sensory input, integration, and motor output. Pause the video for a second. All right, so if you hear the phone ringing, those are your senses. So we are sensing that information, collecting information from the environment. So that's the sensory input here. The integration would be the brain making a decision of, do we want to answer the phone? Do we like this person? And how do we answer a phone, right? Those are the decisions you're making, and the motor output would be the actual muscles in your arm and hand picking up the phone, pressing the button to answer it, lifting it to your ear. Okay, so now let's look at the nerve cell. And we learned a little bit about this next week. So I would draw this in your diagram. I can move my face a little bit here. Okay, so we've got a basic unit of the nervous system is called the neuron. Nerve cell is called a neuron. There's multiple types of neurons. Some look a little bit different, but this is the general image that you see when we're talking about a neuron. So we've got dendrites on the top. This whole purple part up here is the cell body. And these dendrites are kind of like coming off of the head. I feel like this is the head, and I think about the dendrites as like little antlers coming off. Those are receiving impulses and carry those impulses towards the cell body. Then we've got the nucleus, right? That's like the brain of the cell, right? Where the DNA is stored. And then we've got this long piece. The long piece is called the axon. So that's like how the nerve impulse travels and gets carried away from the cell body. And it's covered by these orange globules here, which is called a myelin sheath. So it's just like a fatty covering that insulates the axon, helps to better conduct a nerve impulse, just like how the wires, right, the phone wires on the street are covered with like a rubber coating, right? We don't have just electrical wires up in the sky, or up in the air. They're covered with a rubber coating, right? So that it helps to insulate those electrical signals and prevent something like rain from damaging it, or squirrels from getting electrocuted, or all that other stuff. But yeah, it keeps the electricity in where it's supposed to be and carries it to the end, which is called the axon terminal. Let me move my face here. The axon terminal, and that is the end of the neuron where the chemical message is released and sent to the next neuron. Here is a nerve under a microscope. So we've got the cell body up here. All these long guys are the dendrites. The axon is this long part here, and the axon terminal is where this neuron would connect to another neuron, neighboring neuron. There are several different types of neurons, especially when we talk about interneurons in the brain. We're not going to go over them, but there are many different types of interneurons in the brain that have different jobs. But we're going to just focus on these three for this class. So there are sensory neurons, which I'm sure you can guess are in your senses. So those are the neurons responsible for collecting information from the environment and transmitting that information to the central nervous system. The information is then interpreted by interneurons in the brain. Remember, those are making the decisions, and the spinal cord. You might not think of the spinal cord making decisions, but in terms of reflexes, right, things that just happen automatically, those are things that just touch the spinal cord and are immediately a response is sent back. So they can be integrated right there in the spinal cord. And then motor neurons are the ones that are close to our muscles that tell our muscles how to respond to a stimuli. Okay, so you can kind of see those images here. So if you're thinking of that phone example, right, the sensory neurons in your ear are the ones that are hearing the phone ring or vibrate or whatever, sending that information to the brain. The brain processes the information, and the interneurons, how do I answer a phone? Do I want to answer the phone? Do I like this person? And then a motor response is sent through the motor neurons, which connect to the muscles that tell your hand to pick up the phone. Pretty cool. All right, now let's talk about nerve impulses. So the actual function of a neuron. So nerves are self-promoting, a self-promoting wave of electricity that travels along the surface of the neuron membrane, also called an action potential. And you guys will be modeling this week. There's an image of this here. We have the electrical signal that's traveling down. Electrical signal, nerve impulse, action potential, all those words kind of are interchangeable. Let's look at the mechanism of a nerve impulse. And maybe I'll move myself over here so you can see. At rest, the neuron's membrane is slightly positive on the inside, polarized, due to the slight excess of sodium ions on the outside. Okay, so a lot of this comes down to charges, right, because we're talking about electricity. A stimulus triggers the opening of sodium channels in the plasma membrane of the neuron. This change in positive-negative charges is what creates the electrical impulse. So that quick change of a positive to a negative, the positives moving across to one side of the cell and then quickly back across, is what is creating this action potential, this spark of electricity that's going to travel down the neuron. Now, once that electrical signal reaches the end of the neuron, the axon terminal, it reaches a little space here called a synapse. Okay, so two neurons don't actually touch each other. There's a little microscopic space in between them. That's called the synapse. So this is where the impulses are transmitted from one neuron to another. Okay, so in this space, little chemicals called neurotransmitters are released from the axon terminal of one neuron into the synapse, and they bind to receptors on the next neuron. So these would be the dendrites of the next neuron. So this causes opening ion channels and thereby stimulating an electrical impulse conduction of the next neuron. So then the next neuron has the action potential that's initiated. That electrical current travels down the axon to the axon terminal, where more neurotransmitters are released into the synapse, moves to the next neuron, right? So it's kind of this electrical, chemical pattern that's going on to get that response to where it needs to go. So it's amazing when you think about how quickly the nervous system works and how much is actually taking place here. Okay, so just so you have a definition, neurotransmitters are the chemicals that are released from one neuron to another to cause the electrical chemical impulse. So some examples that you may have heard about: acetylcholine, norepinephrine, dopamine, serotonin, endorphins. These are all the neurotransmitters that can be released from one neuron into the synapse and bind to the next neuron to send a particular signal. Okay, and if we look here, we can kind of see where all this is happening. So again, a nerve, right? Let's say we have a nerve that goes from our spinal cord down to our fingertips. There are many neurons that are lined up that are doing this little dance of electrical, chemical signaling. So we've got the action potential. Remember, that's electrical. So the electricity traveling down one neuron releases chemical neurotransmitters into the synapse, which signals an action potential in the next neuron, release some chemicals. Okay, so this pattern just continues on down.